Greetings, RAISE community. Brent coming in live from Charleston, South Carolina, as my family and I continue our RV voyage around America. I am thrilled to welcome Maria Watson, who is the Vice President for Advancement at Pomona College and an avid motorcycle enthusiast. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you so much. Great to be joining you. Great to be part of the conversation. And the only other thing that I love doing is being on the bike. So happy to talk about that as well.
Absolutely. So one of the ways we've been getting to know our guests, we'll definitely talk about your career and your expansive experience across different nonprofit sectors, which I look forward to discussing. But I actually love knowing about my guests' own college paths, because so often that's our first exposure to the world of advancement, even if we don't know that's what it's called when we're in high school. And so I'd love to know about the Maria who was in New York, considering different college options, and ultimately made your way out to Ann Arbor to the University of Michigan. What led you there?
Yeah, it's a great question, I'm so it was a journey. I was a music major, and I found the path to the University of Michigan through music and through playing the clarinet. And I found the path through the University of Michigan through the Interlochen National Music Camp. And so I was out there for 2 summers in high school. And I actually I was born in New York, but then was in high school in South Florida. My dad was an IBMer and got relocated down there. So middle school and high school was in South Florida. And so it was through Interlochen that I was introduced to Michigan. And I was really fortunate to have scholarship offers from University of Miami and Michigan to play the clarinet. And I wanted to have the experience of the big school and the more of a conservatory training. And so that's where I ultimately ended up at Michigan. I
smiled when you said Interlochen, because I had a friend who attended Interlochen for high school, and also very musical, as you might imagine. And as I was starting Evertrue, literally, she was a business school classmate. I was finishing up my MBA at Harvard, and I had this PowerPoint and a concept, and I was just showing it to any of my friends. And I remember showing it to Christina, and she immediately made an introduction to Interlochen. And so one of my first even exploratory pitches for Evertrue was with Interlochen, which, I'll admit I wasn't familiar with. But as I went to learn about the school and the camp, what an amazing place. I'd love you just to share a little bit more about that camp experience, and for those who aren't familiar with Interlochen, why it's so special.
Absolutely. For those who don't know, Interlochen is in Traverse City, Michigan. So it's in the Mitt, and it's on the west side, the west coast of Michigan, on the Mitt. And it is very similar to a Tanglewood or an Aspen in terms of the students and the experience. And it both has a summer music camp as well as a year-round academy. And the summer music camp is a combination of an all-state for residents of the state of Michigan, and that runs from elementary school all the way through high school. And then they have a national music camp that is for all disciplines, include all art disciplines. So music, dance, theater, creative writing, and they're coming up on their 100th anniversary, and it's a really, really special, magical place that for anyone who has an artistic heart and spirit, to be at that age and to be in that community really it allows you to find a path through and a community of kindred spirits. And that's certainly what I found when I was at Interlochen in high school.
And so you went to the University of Michigan. That connection with Interlochen, your skill and passion for the clarinet led you there. What were the highlights of your college experience, whether it involved music or more broadly?
So some of the highlights, I was certainly the friendships and the relationships and the community and lifelong friendships. And I think that's what many of us can say from our college experience. And some of those friendships have actually led to meeting my husband, 20 years later. There is a terrific composer, Derek Bermel, who is now music director of the American Composers Orchestra at Carnegie, who was childhood friends of my now husband, who introduced us in our 30s. So, I have that to be grateful for, to the University of Michigan. But it was also some mentors. I have, there's a terrific, now retired from University of Michigan, but still performing conductor, H. Robert Reynolds, who was my conductor, who is a dear friend and mentor, who I was also a work study student. So I was managing the programs and the ensembles for Professor Reynolds. And that was one of my first fundraising jobs, was the Band-O-Rama concert at the University of Michigan, which is a really fun program where you are, it's in Ann Arbor is the Hill Auditorium. It's a beautiful auditorium, and you have a concert of the concert programs as well as the marching band, and you're bringing in high school students and middle school students from the whole area, and it's really an introduction to the U of M music program, and it's a fundraiser for commissioning new composers for the band program. So it's a really beautiful flywheel cycle.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that while Zoom and technology have allowed us to be more efficient and scale certain activities, I bet the Band-O-Rama is a lot better in person.
I'm sure it is. 100%. Yeah. And especially the auditorium.
And so, like everyone who has longtime aspirations to lead philanthropic fundraising organizations, you pursued the clarinet. And we're, I'm sure, imagining that that's exactly where this would all lead.
I had no idea where it would all lead. And I actually remember one of the conductors at Michigan pulling me aside and suggesting that arts management would be the path. And it had never, I had no idea what arts management was, and had never considered it. But I then came out of school, had an internship in DC with the Congressional Arts Caucus, was working at night with the National Symphony Orchestra to kind of telemarketing to pay the bills while I was doing the internship. And it led to an arts, in the early part of my career, an arts management path, but I never imagined that it would be fundraising.
Well, tell me more about that, because we've had a lot of guests who are now your peers and leaders in the higher education fundraising sector. And we often refer to the phone-a-thon as the gateway drug to advancement leadership, or at least it used to be. You worked for a telethon for the National Symphony Orchestra. I imagine that's a bit of a cousin to the phone-a-thon. I mean, what are the differences when you think about that constituency, that script, that experience relative to the one that we know better here in the education world?
They're first cousins. They're exactly the same. You are working with the subscribers, the renewals, the lapsed, the single ticket buyers. So it's the same level of frequency that you would see in our higher ed community. And
do you still call them live bunts and side bunts, or did they have a different name in that world?
It was lapsed and renewals. So you didn't have the live bunts and the side bunts. But I think what I found so interesting about that experience was connecting with people who had the passion for the mission. So that's the same similarity of what we're building in the relationships. And also it taught me around the frequency of numbers. So in order to move through calls, in order to reach the sales, to move through the no's in order to reach the yeses, to understand the barriers of no's to reach the yeses, and not to be diminished by the no's to reach the yeses. And that's something that I've fallen back on over and over again in my career.
Love it. And I think there's a reason. I mean, it's operating in that intense environment where you have the good, the bad, the ugly, everything in between. Do you have any experiences that you recall from that time that stood out as being like really positive, or on the other hand, some really tough no's that maybe helped thicken your skin as you were early in part of your career?
Well, I think the toughest no's, and it's hard to, frankly, it's hard to remember that far back, but it's the toughest no's were the ones where I spent so much time. And what I realized was there was an interest there, and there was a connection, but at the end of the day, it was either a combination of the timing for them, or there may have just been other reasons why, personal reasons why they were spending that amount of time with me on the phone. And I had spent all that time with them and couldn't get to the close and couldn't get to the sale. Those were hard, really powerful lessons, and lessons that you have to learn. The highs, and we all remember the highs.
But is the lesson that if you had known what you know now back then, you could have got to the yes, or you would have maybe disqualified them sooner, as opposed to land in the middle, which is a lot of time and zero results?
I would have disqualified them sooner. That was the big lesson.
How? How would you have done that, Maria?
I would have had clearer questions, and this is going back now, let's see, 25, 30 years, but thinking more frequent examples, I would have asked clearer questions around what their intentions were. I think I was at that moment in time, I was focused on building the relationship and building the connection, rather than focusing on where their interests were with at that moment, the National Symphony Orchestra, or for the season at hand. So I was spending more time on the relationship building. And that's a very highly transactional moment, rather than having clarity around their intentions of their interest in the season, their interest in specific concerts, their interest in the calendar, really driving to the transaction and having getting to the ask query.
Yeah.
So which is very different than the major.
No, it's such a balance, because we talk about this as a relationship business all the time. But then there is that balance of, when does it make sense for it to be transactional? When is it truly a relationship business? And then I think a whole bunch of room in between, that's the gray area that we're spending a lot of time thinking about as well.
Yeah, exactly.
But ultimately, you had a good enough experience where it led you to decide, I will maybe play the clarinet nights and weekends, but this is going to be my day job. So what was that realization like? And just tell me about some of those early experiences you had at the intersection of philanthropy, music, the arts, etc.
Well, truth be told, the realization of setting the clarinet aside was when I was working at Lincoln Center for about a decade, and David Schifrin, who's arguably one of the best clarinetists performing, was rehearsing on the other side of my office door. And then I would pick up my clarinet and try and have the same sound as David's. And then I said, you know what, let's put this clarinet down and enjoy David's outstanding recordings, particularly of Mozart. I spent the first decade in marketing and PR at the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center, and then with the New World Symphony, and then came back to New York, which is down in Miami Beach, which was founded by Michael Tilson Thomas, which is an outstanding orchestra if you're not familiar with it. And then came back to New York and was working with a smaller regional orchestra, and was in marketing, and we were recruiting for the head of fundraising. And the president at the time, we were talking through, and we were just having a difficult time identifying the candidate. And I flippantly said, "Why don't I do it? And then you can recruit in the marketing director," not realizing that she might actually take me up on it. And she did. And she was a terrific mentor, Kathy Cahill, and she also was an outstanding fundraiser. And it was at a moment of time of real creativity with the Brooklyn Philharmonic as we were reimagining a program at BAM. And it was a team of 5 in fundraising, and it was not the most traditional way to be introduced into the fundraising path, but I jumped right in as a director of development, managing a team for a mid-size arts organization with a really outstanding mentor, which I'm very grateful for.
And candidly, if I were to look at your kind of resume up to that point, I probably wouldn't have predicted where you are now. You were obviously on a path, and I understand there was an opportunity to explore the education sector and be in New York. But I'd love to know more, because obviously you're very passionate. Your whole life had been about music and the arts. And when did you start to even consider the broader philanthropic space and education specifically?
Yeah, these were tough decisions, and for anyone who has deep passions in specific areas, there's a lot of soul searching that goes into the taking one branch off the path, and these were tough decisions for me, because I so deeply and continue to deeply love classical music and the arts, and then it became a question of, what's the next step in my career? What's the next step in having impact? Because I was so enjoying fundraising and wanting to give back, and really seeing the connection between the mission and resourcing the mission and how to scale that up. And I was the benefit of scholarships in higher ed. It meant a great deal to me. I'm my family, there's 5 children, 2 of us have gone to college, 3 have not. I've seen the difference between the power of higher education, and I wanted to give back. And so the next step in that journey was at Fordham University, and it was a really natural path for me, because it was with a public radio station, WFUV, which is extraordinary. It's a AAA station in New York, and it was a bridge between music and higher ed. While it wasn't classical music, it was music. And so I was able to navigate both of those communities, and a really exciting inflection point for WFUV and for Fordham. And so that started the path with higher ed, and kind of a really interesting journey onward.
I want to talk about the journey, but maybe at this point, I will ask you, what is the one thing that education fundraisers could learn from the arts fundraising world, and vice versa? What's one thing that the arts fundraising world could take away from higher education?
It's such a great question. I think that higher ed, I'm going to offer 2 things that higher ed can learn from the arts. One is the arts has the power, because they're small, oftentimes smaller institutions, they have the power of seeing how more clearly how everything interlocks and seeing the synergy of how everything interlocks. And that's much more difficult to see holistically in higher ed, and to think collaboratively in higher ed, and how to find that synergy in higher ed. So I think that is one piece of it. And the arts organizations oftentimes do not have the same resources that many, not all, but many higher ed institutions have. And so arts organizations are driven with an entrepreneurial drive that sometimes you don't, and are more, that embrace more risk in their experimentation that you often don't find in higher ed. And so I think those are two qualities that higher ed could continue to embrace more. The flip side of it is, in arts organization, and particularly in fundraising, there is a discipline to fundraising there, and successful programs. There is a discipline to our management and our data and our metrics and our success, and that's where arts fundraising and many other organizations, different industries that are fundraising, can really continue to see best in class and next in class within higher education.
Love it. Well said. And then you ended up joining one of the most successful philanthropic enterprises certainly in higher ed, if not the world, at the University of Southern California in New York. Was that a hard decision, easy decision? And just tell me about that journey at USC, which was obviously a very exciting, successful time.
So it was, full disclosure, the vice president at Fordham University, Al Cecchio, was recruited to USC to be the senior vice president. So when Al, who is an outstanding mentor and friend, was recruited to SC, he recruited me to initially open the New York office and the Northeast operation for the launch of the SC campaign. What
year was that, Maria?
So that was 2010.
So you're kind of heart of the financial crisis in New York, opening up a fundraising office, doing remote work before it was cool, basically.
Yeah. What could be hard about that? And I think I was also reflecting upon, so we're in a decentralized university and where I'm opening a central office in New York. And so what's going to be hard about that? It was, and it was a very unusual model for a campaign, because typically you want to raise 40-50%, and then in the quiet phase, and then come out and launch on the public phase. We came, at that moment in time at SC, they came out and launched with about $1 billion on a $6 billion campaign. So really at the height of the crisis. So it was a very unusual model, and then ultimately closed at 7.2. It was also a moment where I thought, can I move from a specialist to a generalist? Can I move from a specialist in music to a generalist for the entire campus? And it was such a rewarding experience to be in New York, be at that moment with the institution, but to be able to build the relationships across the 19 schools, to build the relationships to across the leadership at that moment in time, and to build a new enterprise for an institution such as SC in the Northeast, which there's such a strong alumni base and a strong alumni program, but there had not been a developed fundraising or volunteer leadership program at that level. So to build the architecture of that in support of the broader campaign was a really interesting and exciting time, and then ultimately led to the path onto campus.
I think it's fair to say that sometimes it can feel challenging to be entrepreneurial in higher education because there is so much history and tradition and decades or hundreds of years of legacy to build upon. And so that can make change hard. I would imagine setting up that office had to be one of the more uniquely entrepreneurial aspects that one could do in higher education. And I guess when you reflect on the greatest experiences, the toughest challenges, what really stands out during that specific process?
Yeah, it was such a great question. It was some of the challenges. You probably can tell by my personality that I lean towards the opportunities than focusing on the challenges. But some of the challenges were how to build with a team that is based in a regional office at a distance, coast to coast. How to not only build the relationships, but build the sense of the same culture of the campus in the regional offices, so that you are the strongest ambassadors and also a neutral ambassador for the entire campus. So centralized office, decentralized campus, that you are truly a neutral representative for our decentralized deans and their communities in support of the centralized office. It's a really interesting navigation. And yeah.
Did you feel like you were, I've been waiting to make an analogy. Did you go from being the clarinet player to conducting the orchestra? Was that what was happening?
Well,
or at least the New York version of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it was at least the New York version of it. It was. I mean, there are a lot of leaders in the community. It was helping to connect the dots. In some ways, it was more about being the composer of the music to help
there we go.
Make the connection.
Love it.
And I would never say it was the conductor. Yeah.
What were some of the highlights, like best experiences where you felt like, wow, if we hadn't set up this effort in New York, this probably wouldn't have happened. This outcome, this relationship, this revenue. I mean, were there, as you went through that experience, and probably even to this day, I would imagine there are still gifts emerging that you could trace back to some of that work in 2010, 11, 12, et cetera. What are those highlights?
Oh, there's so many. I think about, first you think about individuals, and there is a continued transformation at the university and in the leadership, and there are leaders that came from New York, that came from the New York area, that are now really strong voices on campus, and that's really exciting to see, and more that are emerging. But to be a part of that process of developing those relationships is really meaningful. Another area, the Shoah Foundation is housed housed at USC. And for those who aren't familiar with the Shoah Foundation, it was founded by Steven Spielberg following the filming of Schindler's List. And it's originally started with the recording of the testimonies of the survivors of the Holocaust. And New York was a market that the Shoah Foundation was, strategically looking to deepen their relationships with as we're coming into the next period of growth, and have had a new executive director and a really outstanding leader who's still there, Stephen Smith. So to work closely with Stephen and the leadership of the Shoah Foundation and the team as they were taking that next step and have since expanded their permanent staff in the New York office as part of the Shoah Foundation was really deeply personally and professionally rewarding part of the journey that we were on.
Can I just ask, as you reflect on that, and obviously, hard sometimes to draw generalizations, but there had been a debate pre-COVID around remote work and, satellite offices. And obviously, the Ivy Plus community maybe has the West Coast and the New York, the New York office. But in general, fundraising in higher education has been deeply connected to the campus, even if the campus is not connected to where alumni live, work, and build their lives. And I do think we're at this moment right now where everybody's so excited to get back to work and get back to normal. Are we missing an opportunity to double down on the fact that we've now all, love it or hate it, gotten more accustomed to remote work? The technology at our disposal today is radically different and better than what you had at your disposal in 2010. Why shouldn't we have USC or Fordham or Pomona fundraisers embedded in all of the top 5, 10, 15, 20 markets? Or maybe they can now be globally embedded instead of having to fly all over Asia once or twice a year. I mean, I don't think it's too early to get your take, and you don't have to be too Pomona specific, but given your work building that office and seeing the impact of having folks on the ground all the time, not just flying in on the red eye, should we be doing more of that in this sector?
It's a great question. And I think it's very powerful. Fundraising is local. All fundraising is local. And our alumni community, regardless of what institution we're involved in, oftentimes is either national or global. And to have authentic voices that can speak to a community and can speak to relationships and leaders in the community is powerful. And to be able to build those networks and relationships in communities is powerful. And it builds the momentum. 3 or 4 times a year coming in and having those trips, those week-long trips, doesn't have the same momentum as being on the ground, living and breathing in a city, whether it's any city, and particularly as dynamic of a city as New York or the Bay Area or other cities. Some of the challenges that you face is how do you keep that connection back to campus? How do you keep that sense of community? Technology has made it a heck of a lot easier to do that and to build that bridge. And with clear intention, you're able to create that alignment of culture between the teams. But I think we're going to see a real disruption in not only our industry, but so many as we come post-COVID. The normal it will be a new normal.
There's a very, very prolific venture capitalist in New York named Fred Wilson, and he has been a very vocal blogger and just thinker, sharing his thoughts publicly for many years. And I followed him, and he just published something this week saying that across his portfolio companies, or out of all the companies he's invested in, they're now doing surveys to figure out what is the return to work? What are the office space requirements? It's one thing if you're Pomona College and you've got a physical presence and you need that to deliver education, or if you're the University of Southern California. But if you're a tech startup that's essentially fully cloud oriented and you've been Zooming and Slacking and Microsoft Teaming, there's a lot of questions from investors right now. What is the future of your real estate footprint? What does that mean for real estate spend across our portfolio? And I think his comment was that they expect it to at least be cut in half immediately coming out of the pandemic. And so my question has been, what if I did a survey of 100 advancement leaders and asked the same exact questions? Would the answer be, we're going to use 99% of the same real estate footprint that we used before the pandemic? And if that is the answer, and I suspect that it might be the answer, should it be that different than the way that the commercial world is adjusting to this post-COVID reality? So I'm not putting you on the spot, but it's just something that's very top of mind. And, I would welcome your perspective if you have one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's something that we've been thinking a lot about at Pomona, and I'm sure every advancement leader is doing the same. How do you maintain a sense of community on our campuses? And so part of the thinking around that is, what's the required footprint for a sense of community? There's the obvious student-facing staff responsibility.
No question. Yep.
And there's a certain element of an advancement footprint that is community facing, that's on the campus. So you immediately think about events or the alumni interface with the community, or the potential parent interface with the community, alumni houses. What does that mean in the intersection of that? But I also think, as a student worker myself, when I was at the University of Michigan, having that student worker experience in person is a sense of community. So, how do you potentially reimagine that student worker experience? But frankly, our fundraisers and a lot of our investment and our manpower in our shops are the fundraisers. If they're doing their jobs, they shouldn't be in the offices, frankly. And so is it really a requirement for us to have the real estate investment for our fundraisers? And then the back office side, I think that's where the real question becomes in terms of our advancement services, our research, potentially even stewardship. Is that more, because that comes more into the tech space, and is that
Yep.
really a requirement on campus? Is there more flexibility, remote work flexibility for the campus?
And also the intersection of that with DEI, which I know is something you care a lot about, and we've been thinking and doing a bunch of work at Evertrue as well. And frankly, if you are limiting your talent pool to be people who can exclusively live in or move to relative high cost of living areas, are you inherently putting yourself at a disadvantage as it relates to being able to attract a broader talent pool that isn't as constrained by geography? So I think that's another part of the conversation as we hear more and more leaders that are really focused on not just thinking about DEI, but doing it. What constraints are we putting on ourselves that are, again, connected to 20 square miles around campus?
Absolutely. And especially when you look at the high cost urban centers that many of our universities are located in, and what that cost of living is. And we're not keeping up with that cost of living with our salaries.
Right. So let's bring your USC journey to a close. You raised $7 billion, not just you, there's a team effort there, but raised $7 billion. Yeah, make a lot of positive impact. And then ultimately, I'd love to know more about what inspired you to decide to seek an ultimate sort of leadership position within the education space. And just tell me a little bit about that process, what you learned along the way, and ultimately why you were excited about the opportunity at Pomona.
Well, I after coming to LA as the Associate Vice President of Development at USC. So moving from New York and then coming to LA and then managing New York and San Francisco, so the two regional markets, and our major gifts team at SC, and closing out the campaign and working closely with a number of particularly our art schools. It's such an extraordinary time of growth and a really exciting time at SC. It then became a question for me of, what's the next step of for the career, and I was really excited to look for an opportunity to help lead a campaign and what that would look like. And for my family, it was very important to be in the LA area, and you get to a certain point where you're really looking for the right institution. And so I found that in Pomona, and the combination of our new president, the combination of the academic excellence, but really the commitment that Pomona has had over the last 20 years to, as you mentioned earlier, diversity, our diverse talent pool, need-blind admissions. Have been developing next practices in admissions, and we have our student population is over 50% student of color, which is really dynamic, and we're now doing a lot of work on inclusion for our student population. That for me was, how can we work with an alumni base that is now 20 years of that's truly representative of our community, and how can we develop next practices that is truly representative and authentic for our community, and that's one of the reasons why I came to Pomona. Besides the outstanding team and the next campaign that's in front of us.
You've referenced this a few times, so I have to ask, what's the difference between a best practice and a next practice?
Today and tomorrow. So that, I think the best practices are oftentimes what we take for granted and what we look to each other for, and the next practice is what we are developing for the future, and what we are developing for the next practice are the best practice of tomorrow.
What's an example that maybe you're excited about right now, either at Pomona specifically or in the sector broadly, that you would say today this is a best practice, but I think tomorrow this might be the next practice?
Well, I would say I would reverse it, that today's the next practice and tomorrow it'll be the best practice. And I think that some of the things that I'm thinking about is, I'll give you some this week data points that we're working through. So a question was raised around. So this is a problem that we're working through at Pomona. The last 20 years, like many of us, we have seen a decline in our alumni participation rate. I think we're all facing that. It's kind of like a national trend downwards. But Pomona, it's been a bit more dramatic. We've gone from 50% to 24% in the last 20 years. And in the last 20 years, we have that also correlates with our commitment to need-blind admissions and a much more diverse alumni base. So there were questions around, is there a correlation that potentially we're seeing a more diverse population that is giving less? Or is there a connection between financial aid and giving? So we were able to work with our institutional research and identify those students who had received financial aid in the last 20 years and connect it with their giving patterns. And we realized that in the last 20 years, 68% of those who had not received financial aid had given some gift of any amount to the college. In the last 20 years, wait for it, 68% of those who had received financial aid had given to the college.
Wow. And the level of, right, you have a hypothesis, you get the data, you test, you measure. Were you all shocked? Were people expecting that? I mean, what was the reaction?
There's a bell curve. So I wasn't shocked. I was just excited to have the data so that I could go and make the case. But there was a bell curve. There was one segment that was testing the hypothesis. There's another segment that it validated the assumptions. But it's like any question that, what also was revealed was that, not surprising, those who had been not on financial aid while they were students were giving twice as much as those that were on financial aid, which you would expect because they were not on financial as a student. But coming post-graduation, that continued. So now we have to ask questions of why. Is that an outcomes question? Is that a impact question? Is that a storytelling? Is that how we're building relationships? And so that's the next question that we're digging into. For me, the best practices that will become the next practices are around how are we shifting our messaging, our stories in an authentic way to our community. How are we shifting who is telling the stories, how we're telling the stories, who are we celebrating in our stories in an authentic way with our communities as we move forward as an industry.
Yeah, I think we think a lot about, is it a marketing challenge? Is it a sales challenge? Is it a customer success and renewal challenge? What are the real because inherently you've got, like, unlike other organizations that oftentimes are starting with cold leads who've never heard of the company or never heard of the industry or the product, you've got this unbelievable common foundation that is the college experience. So where's the gap? Where's the break in the funnel? Is it the marketing and storytelling? Is it the sales? Is it the stewardship post the sale, if you will, post donation? And then how do you start really identifying data and trends and segments that then allow you to test interventions? So now you can see, can we take it from 24% to back to 26%, right? We're not going to go from 24 to 50 overnight, but how can we really be laser focused on a specific cohort, maybe try some next practices and then see, does that turn things around?
Exactly.
Now, at the same time, I imagine, like your peers, while that decline happened, your revenue is growing, or that you saw continued growth in some cases on the major gift or principal gift side of things. So that kind of dollars up, donors down, is that what you experienced, or not as much?
Not as much. And that's what's really interesting. And that's another reason why I came to Pomona, because it's really unusual to find an institution of such excellence where there's an opportunity of such growth. So we have seen over the last 30 years, the same dollars adjusted campaign of 300 million. So there's much more capacity in our community than we have realized. So that's as we are looking at our next campaign and going through our feasibility study for our next campaign. That's what's really exciting to look at and reimagine how we are connecting with our community.
I would love to just get your perspective on next practices around the campaign coming out of COVID. Does it end up looking different than you might have anticipated pre-campaign, or is it more, okay, now this is almost over, let's get back to the plan that was maybe in flight pre-COVID, or is it too early to say?
Well, I would say that my approach was very similar to 9/11. It was very similar to 2007, 2008. It was very similar to COVID. These are moments when you double down. You double down in your relationships, and you accelerate your planning, because you want to be best positioned for when the ride out comes on the macroeconomic side. We will be having a coming out of this recession, and it's been an interesting recession, right? We've seen it in some segments, not all, and it was much shorter than we anticipated. But we're expecting to see an even higher accelerant coming out, and the federal government has played a big part in helping to shorten that path. But it actually
I would say you're in California. There has been a record IPO market. There's been record growth in the crypto space. There's been real estate growth. There's been public markets growth, private markets growth. So the top 10% has done incredibly well at a time when a light has been shined on inequality and the need. So I actually share your, I think, optimism here that this should be too. We've got more acute need than ever before. We've been able to see how education broadly can help accelerate solutions to big problems, vaccines, you name it, public health, social justice. And people at the top are doing really well. So how do we come out of this and really play offense and be aggressive philanthropically as we see other markets rebounding quickly?
Yeah. Well, I think part of that is timing, right? To ensure that when we look at those organizations that were coming out of 2007, 2008, those who were most successful were those that started and launched their campaigns either in that moment or shortly after. Those who waited 3, 4, 5 years later were flat-footed, and then we're playing catch up, and then hit the next downturn. So a lot of it is timing and being positioned to hit when coming out of this. So that's a part of it. And another big piece of it, I think, is ensuring that you are relevant and adjusting to our community now. This has been such a moment of disruption and pain for so much of our community, and to ensure that we as institutions, we as leaders, are having a clear voice and a clear understanding of the impact that it's having on all of our communities, and have real solutions from an institution and personally to move forward for all parts of our communities. I think it's always been an ongoing area of growth for us, and it continues to be now. And for us to be successful, it's even further in stark relief.
You started your career in the arts. We hear a lot about the art and science of fundraising, and you've now been pursuing an MBA on the side, because why not, right? So you've done an executive MBA program. We might have listeners who've thought about that or have considered, hey, maybe I'd like to do an MBA, but is it applicable to the world of fundraising? What's your quick read? Obviously, which MBA and what your goals are, all of that's going to be somewhat personal, but in your world, when you think about the before and after, as I believe you're either concluding or will soon conclude the MBA program, what's your take on that? I know it's not easy to juggle that on top of everything else that's going on.
No, it's not easy. I mean, it's definitely an investment of time, and you need support. You need support of your family and loved ones, and you need support of your team and certainly your boss. So all of those I'm very grateful for. and these are personal decisions, and you should only go into it if it's something that you're really excited by. I think, and I looked at a lot of different programs, degrees. I think specifically for the MBA and fundraising, part of what I have found so interesting is in these roles, and we are talking to leaders in all different industries. We are talking to the leading thinkers in all different industries. And to be able to have this type of training and this type of business training is, I think, a very powerful tool as you are having those deep conversations with these leaders, to really understand the life cycle of a company, to really understand what it means to have to do the capital raise for the IPO, to understand the mechanics of their resourcing and their life. So that's a piece of it. I think it's there's also a whole portion of some of these programs where it's not directly applicable. I mean, I'm doing a global supply chain management class right now. Is that directly applicable to the work that I'm doing? No, but what's been really interesting stepping into my first seat as a VP, you're sitting in a lot of executive staff meetings with, around the table, and you're talking about the widest range of issues across the institution. So this level of training, actually, you'd be surprised when it does come up, and it's very helpful. And that global supply chain management has actually came in handy in the last 2 weeks as we were.
I love it. I mean, I think it's fair to say, fundraising, it's very much a generalist work, right? I mean, you've got to go a mile wide and an inch deep. And I think that's where an MBA is a strong general program where you can get exposure to a lot of things. I have to ask, favorite course you've taken so far? Oh, I can't phrase it this way. Most relevant course you've taken so far, and maybe you already hinted at it, but like least relevant or something that you never otherwise could have imagined studying?
So, the 20-year-old in me, if I were to go back in time, could never have imagined that I would have enjoyed the finance course that I just completed. The 20-year-old in me that struggled through macroeconomics could never have imagined that I so deeply enjoyed the corporate finance course that I just wrapped up 2 weeks ago. My favorite course by far are the leadership courses, the strategic leadership, and to really dig deep, not only into the personal growth and the personal awareness and the tools that they're providing, but also to think more strategically about how to change, how to be an agent of change around culture. A lot of the work that we're doing, that we all do, is supporting our president, supporting our institution, and supporting the future of those institutions. And a lot of that has to do with change. So that strategic thinking around how to be intentional on change, it has been really, really interesting.
Can I ask if you took a negotiation course?
I have not yet, although we did have a hostage negotiator from the LAPD in a couple of weeks ago, and that was very informative.
I wonder, it'll be fun to reconnect. I loved the negotiation course that I took in business school, but I'm always fascinated about the intersection of philanthropy and negotiation, because I don't think we talk enough about the fact that securing a gift is a negotiation, and from to the point of a walk away where there's no gift, which isn't often talked about, but happens way more frequently than we acknowledge in this space, to I got the gift, but maybe I left $1 million on the table, to I started here and we were able to 10x the gift. And I don't know. I feel like that's where the art and science intersection is I just still have so much to learn. But I don't know if you have anything that comes to mind when you think about the fact, the negotiation or the art of negotiation with donors.
Yeah, it's such a great question, because I think that, there's the biggest takeaway for me is don't assume. Oftentimes we go in with these assumptions around where the interests are, what the potential gift size is, how the gift will be structured. And I'm always surprised in all of those areas where, and every time I go in with some level of assumption, inevitably it's invalidated, because it until you ask those deep questions and build the relationship and continue asking the questions as you're moving through, you don't really know. And part of that negotiation is building the potential of the gift together. Thinking about the principal gifts and the transformational gift, dreaming side by side together, so that you can then dream of the potential impact together, and then asking those questions of and unlocking the potential of their gift together. And then when it comes to negotiations, ensuring that you don't say yes too quickly and you don't accept no too quickly.
Well said. Well, I want to be conscious of time, but I have to ask, from clarinets to business school, music fundraising, education fundraising, and motorcycles on the side. I mean, what was the catalyst to get into, and what is the expression, when you're a Ducati enthusiast? I don't want to say it wrong. So what do you call yourself?
A Ducatista. A Ducatista.
Ducatista. A Ducatista. I wanted to pronounce it correctly. So thank you.
You're welcome.
So how does one become a Ducatista on the journey? Yeah.
I always wanted to ride, and kind of like your mom as well. After you burned your leg, when I was a teenager, my mom was definitely put the kibosh on it. So when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I thought, I'm just going to jump in. And I honestly didn't know if I was going to enjoy it, but I ended up loving it and loving speed, loving the Ducatis, and, getting on the street, getting on the track. Also in the last couple of years, getting on the dirt. Thankfully, my husband also enjoys this path as well. So we share it. And it's one of those, everybody has different places where they find the escape. And for me, being on a bike is a very quiet and meditative and relaxing space to be. And it's one of the few places where all the white noise disappears and you can just completely focus and have fun. So that's it. And it's a community.
I can't imagine many better hobbies to have had over the last 12 months than that one. When you think about what you can do in a global pandemic in California, riding the bike had to rank pretty high up there.
It's pretty high up there. And, Claremont, where Pomona is located, is right at the foot of Mount Baldy. So we were up and down Mount Baldy within, 40 minutes, which was a real great escape and socially distanced escape.
Love it.
Last year.
You referenced the track, so I think I'm allowed to ask this, but what's the fastest you've driven the bike? And then second, what's the most memorable ride you've ever been on?
So you can ask it because it's on the track, although I won't tell you how fast I've gone on the public street.
I won't ask. You went there, not me, but now I'm kind of curious. So it's up to you.
No, on the track, it's about $180 down the straight. It's easy to go fast on these bikes. The hard part is braking for turn one and making sure you make it through turn one. But it's easy to get the speed up. It's actually getting around turn one. The most memorable ride, let's see. There's so many. I think it's probably right now the favorite place to be is on the dirt, and there's a beautiful park called Borregos. It's Ocotillo Wells, and it's south of Palm Springs, and it's an OHV park, and it's near Borrego Springs, and it basically, if you've ever seen what's the name of that film? It's like Blade Runner, where, it's like it looks like a moonscape. That's essentially what it is, and it's like ATVs and bikes, and that's what it looks like, and it's just free to be out. So that's probably the most fun, because you're just exploring, and it's open. It's less about the speed, and it's more about the exploring on those rides.
Have you ever gone on a ride with donors? Do we have donors that are motorcycle enthusiasts where there's been an intersection, or not yet?
Not yet, although I have had a number of donors ask to get on the back of my bike, but I have not done that yet.
Well, if that happens, please take a selfie, and we'll make sure to feature that on the blog. This has been such a fun conversation. I'd love to keep going. I know we're on time here, but I have to ask two final questions. One, if people want to, are you hiring, or do you envision yourselves hiring? And two, if folks who are listening want to learn more about that or connect with you, what's the best way to do so?
Thank you so much for asking that question. We are building our team, getting ready for the campaign. We're absolutely hiring. We're hiring in our advancement services as well as in our frontline fundraisers, particularly. So an AVP for advancement operations, and they'll be hiring within the team. Director of major gifts, director of leadership and reunion giving, major gift officers. So we're building out the team, and we're really excited. So if you're interested, please reach out. We're also partnering with Aspen Leadership Group for our recruitment, so you can reach out in both ways.
Love it. And LinkedIn, okay, if people want to reach out directly?
Yeah,
Maria?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for sharing your journey with our audience. And for all of you listening, if you want to talk music, motorcycles, global supply chain, corporate finance, or fundraising, please reach out to Maria. Let her know that you heard this episode. And I just wish you the absolute best as you establish next practices at Pomona. And it's really been fun getting to know you.
To you as well. Thank you so much for the invitation. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Really fun. Be well. Take care, Maria.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.